Hello everyone, this is your teacher, Paul. Today is March 18th, 2020, and I'm making this video for my literature class that would normally meet from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Remember that after the break, you are required to check in with me on a regular basis on Mondays and Wednesdays, preferably between those hours of 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We're going to try a couple things in order to maintain contact with you. One includes Google Hangouts or Google Meet, and more information about that will be forthcoming. But for today, you should have read entirely through the first book in 1984 up through chapter 8. And there is a quiz which I sent to you in your email. Looks like this. And if you would like to just send me the answers, you can send me the answers in the email as a response. Or if you want to take the quiz, you can just print it and take a picture and send me the answers on a quiz through a photo. There's also a vocabulary assignment. It looks like this. It's available in Google Classroom, and I think I also emailed that assignment to you, so you shouldn't have any trouble finding it. All I want you to do is write out the definitions that are provided and then put each one of those words into a sentence. I want you to try to make a sentence for each of those vocabulary words, and then if you could please create a document. This would require that you type out your definitions and sentences for each word, and then send that to me as a document. And that's due by April 8th. The due date for the assignment is on the Google Classroom. I'm going to include a picture of the Google Classroom so that you know what that looks like. I sent you a link to this page. This is what we'll be using for the assignments. Just click on classwork and you'll find the assignments there. Please continue writing summaries for each chapter. By now you should have chapter summaries for the first book, chapters 1 through 8, and after spring break, which is next week, you should have started and completed by March 30th chapters 1 through 4 in book 2. Just follow the schedule for the reading assignments. I gave this to you at the beginning of the term, and it's also included in Google Classroom. Okay, so now I'm going to say a few words about chapters 5 through 8. In chapter 8, Winston has lunch with some of the people that he works with, and it begins with his friend Syme, who works in the language department, the Newspeak department. He's a philologist, and his work involves reducing the language, simplifying the language so that people have fewer words to use in order to express themselves. This is an important idea in the novel. That is, people are encouraged to think about things very simply and without any sort of complexity. By simplifying the language, it becomes more difficult for people to commit thought crimes. They don't have the ability really to express themselves. It's interesting that Winston believes that Syme is so smart that it's inevitable that he will one day become vaporized, even though there's no indication that he's against the party or has any grudge against Big Brother. But notice in a few areas of this chapter that Winston has this belief that eventually Syme will be done away with. Throughout the novel, you'll notice that Winston consistently believes that anyone who has a thought against Big Brother or the government will eventually be caught, and that includes himself. In chapter 6, we learn something about Winston's ex-wife, Catherine. He is no longer married to her. She and Winston were unable to have children, and the marriage just kind of fell apart. And Winston tries to find intimacy through a relationship with a prostitute. That's how the chapter begins and ends. It's important to remember that the government tries as much as possible to discourage intimacy, because if people are intimate with each other, then they can trust each other and share secrets and confide in each other. And this is what the government doesn't want. The government wants everyone to remain suspicious of each other. So that's why it's important to try to prevent people from entering into any sort of intimate relationship. In chapter 7, we learn about the proles. This is a large underclass of people that makes up the majority of Oceania. They're ignorant and they don't really care about party politics. Winston mentions that there's no effort to try to indoctrinate the proles into the party or party ideology. And in fact, it's not desirable that the proles have any sort of strong political feelings. And that's mentioned on page 71. Chapter 7 also includes a brief history of life under capitalism that is before the revolution. And there are 3 people who are mentioned in this chapter, Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, who we would assume were the original leaders of the revolution. Eventually, these leaders, Aronson, Jones, and Rutherford, were purged from the party and executed. This chapter ends with some commentary on the power of the party, and that they're so powerful they can make people believe things that aren't true. It ends with this. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease with which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand, much less answer. And yet he was in the right. They were wrong, and he was right. The obvious, the silly, and the true had got to be defended. Truisms are true. Hold on to that. The solid world exists. Its laws do not change. Stones are hard. Water is wet. Objects unsupported fall toward the earth's center. With the feeling that he was speaking to O'Brien and also that he was setting forth an important axiom, he wrote, "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that's granted, all else follows." And this is important for what happens later in the novel, this idea that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. That is, if you know the truth, then you should be able to believe in the truth and not what other people tell you to think. You should be able to think for yourself. That is true freedom. In chapter 8, Winston goes into the Prole district and he finds a bookstore where he buys a book that he's going to use as a diary. And he also meets a man named Mr. Charrington, who happens to be the owner of the bookstore. And Mr. Charrington shows him to some sort of an apartment that's above the bookstore. This apartment will become important later in the novel. And then that ends chapter 8. So that's a brief overview of chapters 5 through 8. Remember that you are responsible for chapter summaries, and your descriptions of what happens in each chapter should be at least about a paragraph long. And don't forget the assignments that I mentioned earlier. Have a good day.